All right, joining me on the show now is the president and CEO of the Michigan Black Business Alliance, Charity Dean. Welcome to the show.
Hi, so glad to be here.
I'm glad you're joining us. Charity's usually the first person I call when I need some insight into how the business community is thinking, and it's been really cool to see the Business Alliance grow from a Detroit and like Southeast Michigan project to now being across the state. And maybe we could just start if you could tell us a little about that journey, how you got into this work, and what does the Michigan Black Business Alliance do?
Yeah, absolutely. I spent many years as a public servant working formerly in Mayor Duggan's administration. I was the director of civil rights, inclusion, and opportunity. And when COVID happened, I immediately became responsible for the city's small business response. And it was during that time where we really saw a need for an organization that was here locally to advocate for Black-owned businesses. Black businesses and Black people were being hit by the disease of coronavirus and then the impacts of the economy. And so the what was then called the Metro Detroit Black Business Alliance started in March. We officially launched in March, although a lot of the planning and the research for it started during the pandemic. And we are almost 5 years old. We'll be 5 years old in March of 2026. And we were focused on Metro Detroit, but what we've seen is that there is such a need for advocacy and programs that are designed to help Black businesses grow, sustain, and thrive across the state. You know, small businesses employ 50% of Michiganders, and that statistic is relevant in Detroit as well. And so, in 2024, we expanded to be the Michigan Black Business Alliance, and we took some of our programs and are taking some of our programs on the road in Lansing, Benton Harbor, Flint, Grand Rapids. We just had a call this afternoon. I had about 100 and so members on there, and they're from all over the state. So it was really good to talk to them and talk about what we got going on there.
I remember during the pandemic, there was a real effort to support Black businesses. There were even like news agencies that I worked at were putting together lists of
Yeah.
Black-owned businesses across the state, letting people know, here's how you can support them. It just, as an observer, it feels like some of that has been less emphasized as time goes on. We're like 5 years out of the first coronavirus case. I'm
Yep.
not sure how far out of the pandemic we actually are, but um, from your perspective, like there was a lot of intentionality around supporting Black businesses a few years ago. Has that kept up or has anything changed there?
I'll say this. One of the things that the pandemic did was it did not create any disparities, but it highlighted disparities that already existed. And so you saw really the big push for supporting Black businesses during the pandemic because everyone was sitting at home, right? And and it was very clear. You could just see it. The math was clear. I think that the disparity still exists. There's a racial wealth gap in our country. White families and Black families with the same education, the same income. A white family's gonna have 9 times the wealth as Black family, and that's not a new statistic. And we see entrepreneurship as one of those pathways for closing that racial wealth gap. But the need is still there. I would say we did see a lot of attention, but people's attention spans in this country get short, and when the political winds change, oftentimes so do things that really aren't really motivated. If they're motivated from charity, if you will, no pun intended, then a lot of times it's easy to look to the next cause. But if you actually look at the racial wealth gap and the problem in our economy, one as an economic problem, as an economic problem for our country, then I think systems change becomes more permanent. And so we really have to kind of reshape how we look at it. When you look at it as charity, then you go on to the next issue and the next issue. But when you look at this as like an actual tool that continues to keep America and not as competitive as other countries in the world, and you look at it as not allowing the state of Michigan and even the city of Detroit to compete, then we might be a little bit more focused long term.
Public officials, when I think of kind of what the conversation's been like in the last year or so, there's like this real acknowledgement that small businesses are the backbone of the community, the backbone of the economy, a way for Detroiters to build wealth and become, self-sufficient. But there's always this feeling that it's too difficult to start a business and sustain one. There's been efforts this year to peel back some of the regulations around small businesses, streamline the process of getting licenses. But it sounds like there's more work to be done there. Can you tell us, like, what are the big challenges that stand in the way for someone to start a small business in the city of Detroit? And for those that are, maybe a couple of years into their journey, is there some insecurity there? Like, what do they face that prevents them from being, sustainable long-term businesses?
Yeah, I mean, we could be here all day, right?
Yeah.
Uh, but one of the biggest obstacles for small business across the board is access to capital. Most small businesses are undercapitalized. And so a lot of folks are using their own savings. And then when you get into the racial wealth gap component of that, folks don't have assets to leverage to get the capital that they need for their business. So their access to capital continues to be an issue. But then when you also layer on access to capital with what I like to call overregulation of small businesses, I really believe small businesses across the state are really overregulated and under-resourced, meaning that they are required to compete in terms of compliance with corporations that are not their size. But when it comes to the resources that are available for small businesses, there's just a lack. And so I think when you couple access to capital with overregulation, and then also, just not having an environment, a business friendly environment. And I want to be clear, I'm saying a small business friendly environment. It makes it really, really difficult. But one thing we know about entrepreneurs, we see this in Detroit, we see this across the state, is there is this some sort of like the resilience, kind of like there's this hustle mentality. People have dreams that they want to see come into fruition. And despite all of these challenges, we do see small businesses opening every day and despite the environment, people are still starting and attempting to grow small businesses. And that's what we try to do at the Black Business Alliance, is try to help our members to navigate bureaucracy, for example, or use our voice to talk to elected officials or decision makers to ask them, are they thinking about small businesses when they're making these decisions that will inevitably impact them?
How impactful, or I guess, what has the impact been of some of the changes that were made earlier this year? I think it was in the spring. It was announced that they were going to get rid of a duplicate license that restaurants needed to get to kind of make that easier. I think they tried to peel back some of the steps that it takes to get licensed as well. And then there was a concierge group that was put together, I think, based out of the mayor's office, that would basically help serve as kind of a liaison between small businesses that don't have those legal teams and those technical folks that can navigate some of this stuff, and the city government, to say, people within the government are going to help you along that path. Has that made much of an impact yet? Are we seeing the effects of that?
So, as it relates to the ordinance that removed the duplicative license, I don't have the data on that immediately, but I mean that's an automatic, immediate fix, right? Where you don't have to get something because you're already getting it at the state. The concierge service is just getting up and running, but we work with that team, and we have been working with that team for a long time. I think the city of Detroit, and I can say this because I worked in on the 11th floor, like I worked in the mayor's office. It looks very different today than it did 5 years ago for small businesses. It just does. And whether it's the concierge team, whether it's the director of entrepreneurship now that we did not have, and so whether it's we announced the Capital Hub earlier this week. There are a lot of things that we had talked about during the pandemic and talked about over the first couple of years post COVID that are actually happening now, but we still have such a long way to go. I mean, we have a long way to go. We have to really center small business as drivers of economic development, and not be afterthoughts of economic development. And I think we're heading in the right direction, but we still have a long way to go.
When we talk about the over regulation, can we dive more into the weeds on that? One example, I guess, I have in my neighborhood, there's a coffee shop that has some damage to its facade. And so, there was like a risk of some materials like falling on people. So they blocked off the street. They got a permit from BC, and it's been I think, over a month now since they've had that permit and the work hasn't been able to get going. So I guess that's an example that I've heard of, some of the issues that they have with the city and like getting permissions to do things that in the meantime is kind of affecting the foot traffic in that area. But I'm sure you have a lot of examples. Like, what are we actually talking about when it comes to overregulation?
All of it. I do have examples because, in addition to, running the Black Business Alliance, I get the privilege and honor to practice what I preach. I own a coffee shop, I
Yeah.
own a cafe. So it's
Shout out Rosa.
yeah, right. Shout out to Rosa. Please visit us because I'm serious about this. But like, the sign ordinance, which is something that I think you might be alluding to, which took 2 years. I mean, if I just talk about me, when I opened Rosa in 2020, it didn't take 2 years. It took 2 years to get our liquor license. It took about a year to get our sign because you have to go through the city's process. You can't just it's not like getting, your inside, painting and calling a painter and saying you have to go through the cities, you got to stop get a pull of city permits, and then you have to use the city's people. And the city doesn't have a long list of people. And some of those folks in that list aren't Detroit businesses. So so we ended up having to work with a company that was not even in Detroit because we had to go through the city of Detroit's list, and it was just a long, process. When I think of regulation, I think about that. Anything that has to do with getting your building open. Um, the clearances process, making sure that departments talk to each other. So what happens is businesses have to get certain clearances in order to move forward in the permit and licensing process. But the clearance just means that this department has cleared you. But our government, and I'm sure Detroit is not the only one, they put that burden on the business owner. So instead of the city saying, hey, BC, go talk to Treasury, go talk to tax, go talk to these folks and make sure it's cleared, it's on the business owner to go to tax, get the clearance, then I've gotta go to health and get the clearance, and then I gotta give it back to BC, and everyone's on the same elevator that morning going into work. And so there's a lot of things that we could do to reduce that. When I talk about overregulation, I'm also talking about the cost. All these permits and fees and licenses, they cost. And so that's the cost of doing business. When you get into, I was very vocal around the earned sick time legislation because I really advocated for a small business exemption for employees that have 10 for businesses that have 10 employees or less, because of the cost that it will incur on them. And it's not there's nothing wrong with requiring small business to be more employee friendly and to do these things. But the key is that you want to make sure that you're doing it in an environment where they could thrive. And really what we need decision makers to say is not you should do this, but how can we make sure that you can do this and you have the resources to do it, right? And so I think that's just a fundamental flaw of government in general. But I think we could do if we have that approach more often. How do we make sure that you can do this? What do we look at the carrots versus sticks in order to encourage the behavior we want from our business community?
Yeah, how much of a detriment is just like the expense of property taxes and like rental rates of having like commercial real estate in the city? Like, if you want a brick and mortar space, right, where people can come and you can do business with them in person instead of having like a virtual shop, um, how big of a barrier is that? I mean, we're talking about access to capital, so people are cash strapped as it is. We've got some of the highest property tax rates, in the state. Um, like you're saying, all these fees cost money too. But in terms of like getting a physical space, how difficult is that?
It is extremely difficult, and especially depending on where you wanna go. So, part of one of the things that we were advocating for, at the Black Business Alliance, when these development projects are coming downtown and, you think about what retail tenants you want in the spaces. Are we building a downtown that is inclusive and inviting for small businesses to set up shop and to do business? Or do we just assume we're going to get a national tenant here because the price is going to be so prohibitive for someone that is a Detroit based business? And that goes to my point of what I'm talking about when I say center small business in the economic development strategy. When you're thinking about growing the city population or growing the state, people decide where they want to live by what's around. And by what's around, generally they're talking about small businesses. And so one of the things that that we can do, because I'm always trying to think of a solution, is think about tenant improvements, right? For developers that have space, how can you aid with helping build out the space? Because when you're a small business, you're responsible for that space almost as if you own that space. Something gets broken, you got to fix it. I mean, at Rose, I've been there 3 years now. We've had plumbing issues and electrical issues, and then rent is going up, and then DTE issues, and then water bill issues, and you got to get you need a new floor, and you need this, and that is that and again, this comes with the cost of doing business, but when you're already cash strapped and you already have an access to capital issue and you're already overregulated and it's difficult to get, responses from the city, you got a pro permit to even do the thing, it does become a deterrent. But if we really look at this from a neighborhood's perspective and to say, and I use Grandmont Roselle all the time as an example in Detroit, if we have someone in the mayor's office saying, this is an area that is populated, that population is growing. We know that. How can we be more thoughtful about making it easier for brick and mortars to line Grand River? And how might we work with the building owners to give maybe a tax incentive if they provide tenant improvements for their residents or for their retail commercial residents or commercial occupants. So that's what I'm talking about. That's the like strategy, the creativity that I think could happen to really make more of an incentive for brick and mortars. But it is a hard road.
Yeah, you mentioned Grand River, where Rose is at, and I think of that, among a handful of other streets like, Warren and Dexter and places where the city's like put a lot of investment. Some of these are like strategic neighborhood fund areas where there's been private public partnerships to, build up this space and make it more inviting for people to come visit as well as like businesses to open there. And there's been talk from the mayoral candidates in the primary, and now Mary Sheffield has picked up this idea of building commercial improvement authorities out in outside of downtown to basically give them better access to tax incentives that would bring down the cost of all the things that we're talking about. What do you think of that concept of expanding commercial improvement authorities? And it's something we've used to pretty great effect, I think, in the downtown, but um, not as much elsewhere in the city.
Yeah, so I love the concept. I mean, for a very short time, I actually served on the board of DADA, and so the idea of understanding that you've got this particular area where you can capture taxes and then use it to reinvest in that particular area, I think it makes a lot of sense. The biggest key or the challenge is getting people to say yes to tax.
Yeah.
And that's gonna be the challenge, but if you make it pretty, if you make the deal sweet, if you figure out a way, that people, and especially, as homeowners, I'm no longer a homeowner in that area, but I, I can imagine saying, "Yes, I would be okay with this in my neighborhood if that meant that I could walk to my bookstore and I could walk to a coffee shop, and all that meant that we could have money to invest in sit-down restaurant in my neighborhood." And so I like the idea. It'd be interesting to see how people respond to it.
Yeah, I mean, I hear a very strong sentiment of folks who are just like ideologically opposed to using tax abatements in general, and then there's other folks who say part of the problem is that it's really unfair the way we're doing this. That if there were more folks that could access these tax breaks, maybe it would create more equitable development, beyond the downtown itself. So yeah, I'm curious how that would be received as well. Do you see any major differences between the two mayoral candidates in terms of their business development strategy? I think they're saying a lot of the same things around like cutting back regulations, like we've been talking about. But what are some of the key differences you might see there?
Well, for me, it's hard. I don't. It's hard because the hard part of this is that I don't know what Ken Logg's actual small business strategy is. We did host a small business forum where we invited candidates, and it was a virtual forum, and it was just focused on small business. We didn't want to talk about anything else, but just to hear small business. And he did not attend that forum, so we haven't been able to sit down and understand what his policy is. Council president did attend the forum, and a lot of the things that she said in that forum align with some of the things that we've been saying publicly, what we would think a mayor needs to be thinking about, creating an office and sustaining the office for us of small business within the city of Detroit, maintaining the concierge, reducing red tape is really important. And so the first stark difference is that I don't know what the policy. Not to say that there isn't one, but just I don't know what the policy is of
Yeah. You're just
Pastor
looking for
Kinlock.
that same kind of outreach maybe to the business community to help you guys understand where he's at on that.
Yeah, and I have sat down with, the Sheffield campaign on multiple occasions to get a sense of, their small business strategy and to talk about really what we think works now and what we would love to see, stay, 'cause, ultimately, there's still gonna be a transition, right, from we're gonna have a different mayor, come January, and so there are things that we like that are here that we would love to stay, and there are things that we think, can be done better.
Are there, things in the Sheffield plan that we haven't mentioned? You talked about the Office of, Small Business. I don't remember the exact name of it, but essentially she wants to create an office to help, move that forward, which may not sound like the sexiest thing for folks, but in terms of like
Text to me, Malachi.
right, but will help people maybe understand why that's important.
Yeah, because, you know, and, when you're thinking about small business, I kinda led with this, right? 50% of Detroiters are employed by small business. When you think about how small businesses can grow, scale, and thrive, when you think about neighborhood safety and what it means to have a thriving neighborhood, you gotta have someone there that is thinking about first small business. That small business does not become an afterthought. And for a long time, let me be clear, it was. I mean, folks were not part of the reason why our organization exists was to kind of ring the bell and say, hey, there's this whole constituency that often gets ignored. And so I'm excited about her plan for the Office of Small Business Affairs because if for nothing else, the first thing is that you've got someone in the mayor's office as a part of economic development strategy thinking about the small businesses that fill the streets and homes of Detroiters. But you also have, small business owners are taxpayers, right? So they're paying into the system. And a lot of times the system hasn't been created for them. And that's why that Detroit Capital Hub is so important. I said on Tuesday, for the first time, well, I shouldn't say first time, but we're making steps where city is creating processes for the small business, not making small businesses have to figure out city processes, right? And so that having that office there is really crucial to continuing that work. And then you can't measure what you don't manage, right? You can't manage what you don't measure. If you don't have an accountability space there in the mayor's office, how do you even know how you're doing with small business? And then who do small businesses go to? Right? They're not developers that have, the mayor on their cell phone and, they don't have time to go to, public hearing, every, day. And so having that office again lets small business owners know that they matter and they have a voice in the mayor's office.
Yeah, I feel like if you know somebody, if you have like a connection to city government, whether it's in business or really any problem that you have, you're like more likely to get that problem solved, which can be frustrating for folks that don't have
Yep.
those connections, right?
Yeah. And I mean that speaks to equity. And so it
Mhm.
shouldn't be that way. It really shouldn't be that way. And so I think this says we have you. And I'm excited about the office.
It's kind of wild actually to hear that 50% of Detroiters are employed by a small business. That's like a higher number than I would have probably assumed. Is that higher maybe in Detroit compared to other cities, or is that pretty normal?
It's pretty normal, it's comparable. The big asterisk I would say is that the definition of small business varies, and so that not necessarily micro business. So
And
small business varies based on industry. Like there's a federal definition of what a small business is based on the industry. It depends on how many employees and how much money and revenue. But no, that's a statewide statistic. That,
There's always a conversation at the city council table of where contracts are going, and there's always a push among council members to make sure more of the city's businesses going toward Detroit-based businesses. How are we doing there, and how can we be better? I mean, some of the the explanations that we hear from city departments about why contracts are going to companies in the suburbs or in Ohio or across the country even is that Detroit businesses don't have like the capacity to do the
There's
kinds of
no
work that
word.
they need. Yeah. So I don't know. Is that how does that land with you?
So I think 2 things. First, what I would really love to see, more of in this current administration, even, still a couple months left, and the new administration, is more transparency on where the contracts are going, specifically of the contracts, whether they're Detroit-based or not. I wanna get deeper than even Detroit-based because, I used to run the city's, civil rights department, and so Detroit-based just means you have a Detroit location, right? So technically, Microsoft as a Detroit-based business, or Google is a Detroit-based, they got a Detroit office, that's Detroit-based.
As opposed to being like Detroit headquartered,
That's
right?
exactly right, or Detroit resident employed, which means 51% or more of your employees are Detroit. But I'd also like the city to publish what minority, how many women-owned contractors are there, how many Black-owned contractors, and you'll always get pushback because they're not allowed to give preference, but we're not asking for preference, we're asking for the data,
Mhm.
right? And you can publish data without giving a preference, and so that's the first thing I'll say. The second thing I'll say when it comes to capacity is that you not you the only way to deal with the capacity issue, if you wanna solve it, is to deal with the capacity issue. And you deal with the capacity issue by dealing with all of the other barriers that are impacting small business. So if we don't have a comprehensive, small business strategy, I think my motion detector, sorry, light went off. Sorry about that.
That's okay. We can edit around that.
Okay. If you don't have a comprehensive, small business strategy around starting small business, right? If you're not thinking 4 or 5 years ahead of time to be able to say, "You know what? These contracts are coming to an end, and we know they're coming to an end in 3 years. What can we be doing in the small business ecosystem to make sure we got Detroit businesses ready for these contracts when they come available?" That's that level of proactive, participation you need, but you've gotta care. You gotta actually be measuring and putting your own report card out there in order to do the work so that your report card looks the way you want it to look. But if you're not publishing it and you're not sharing it, then you'll always just say, "Well, they don't have the capacity." I mean, and that's been the excuse. I mean, you could say that has been an excuse, really used for people of color, for Black people for a long time, depending on what it is. Or there's not enough lawyers. Well, they can't pass a test, or they're not enough. They can't do this, which is it's just not true, right? And so the question is, what are you doing to accomplish that goal, and are you going 4 or 5 years ahead of time? When we think about manufacturing plants, and when we think about really trying to recruit and attract talent, we think ahead of time, right? We're thinking years in advance. When you invest in large tech companies, you're thinking 10 years, 7 years ahead of time, right? We're just getting into AI, but there's been investment in AI, you know, for over a decade. And so with that same intentionality, you can change the game on Detroiters getting contracts. And with that same intentionality, you can change the game on Black businesses growing, scaling, and thriving.
I want to ask about how public transit fits into some of this. It seems like a big issue for workers to be able to get to jobs, that they need. And so when a bus is late, or if you can't rely on public transit, that kind of stands in the way of being able to get economic opportunities. It's also, the D2A2 bus to Ann Arbor. People use that to go to frequent restaurants. And I wonder if there's more people going from Detroit to Ann Arbor than Ann Arbor to Detroit for that kind of thing, for like a day trip.
Mhm.
Um, do you see, public transit as being important for this overall kind of conversation about supporting small business?
Absolutely, because after access to capital, the second number, the second issue for a small business is labor, workforce. And so these are whether you're talking about childcare, whether you're talking about transportation, whether you're talking about creative ways to provide healthcare and other benefits. These are issues that impact our members as well, 100%. If the buses aren't running on time and someone gets to work late and that they can't open the coffee shop because I mean, this has happened, right? And so we do need a comprehensive transit plan. I'd love to have amazing regional transit. But I mean, you also got to deal with, like, we cover some race issues. There's some real race issues in Michigan, and we just got to call it out
Mhm.
because it is. And until we can name it and then solve it, we're just always going to do this dance of like, well, we don't want to go to Detroit. You know,
Yeah.
it's a thing, but absolutely, it is critical to the success of small business being able to have reliable and safe transportation for the workforce.
Here's maybe kind of a roundabout example, but this week, Twitter's main villain for Detroit is a person that was complaining about a parking ticket that he
I
got. Right? He went to go to a business to get a cup of soup. He didn't pay the parking meter because he felt like he was just gonna be in and out, and then he got hit with a ticket, and he said, "You know what? I'm not coming back into Detroit to do business here because this is, a barrier." And a lot of people were saying, "Hey, man, it costs like $1 to get, your parking." So that's kind of I don't know. He's been getting dragged a little bit, including by the city's, official Twitter account.
I saw that, and it's funny because at first I saw his post. I don't know how it came up, and then I saw the city's retweet. You know, so I think a couple of things. You know, one, that's not like no one's attacking you. We have to pay. Like we have to pay to park, and you have to pay to park in any city. When you go to Ann Arbor, when you're in Royal Oak, no one is like no one's saying that, right? If you get a ticket in Ferndale, you're not saying, "Oh, I'm never coming back to Ferndale again because I didn't pay the parking." It's easy to rag on Detroit. That's the easy thing. That's low hanging fruit. That's easy to do. Because a lot of times, I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier about charity. If you look at whatever you're doing in the city as if doing it from a place of charity, then you're going to feel like people should be grateful that you're here. And how dare they, enforce parking,
Yeah.
enforce their ordinance on you because we should be grateful that you decided to get sued. And that just comes from a place of entitlement. But that happens. It's easy to do that in Detroit. I don't feel like it is a barrier to business that we charge for parking. I think in 2025, I mean I think that's a 20th century issue. We could have been arguing about that in the 40s, but this is not even a new thing. Like you do have to pay for parking.
There's been, I think, some conversation around getting rid of, mandatory parking minimums for new businesses as well. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Look, let me so I'll say this to my friends at the City of Detroit Parking, Department who's probably watching this and saying, "Yeah, I owe some tickets, so I just wanna give that disclaimer."
Me too. Me too, yeah.
I have a very interesting relationship with the parking no, when COVID first happened, the first thing we did actually was put those 15-minute signs, out. And I think that was the point was to make sure that people knew that they could come in and go in and out of food. I think the city's got to do when it comes to parking. There's so many other things that are at play. It's not just the business. It's traffic. It's where it is. It's the residents that live in that area. I don't have too much of an opinion around how the city decides to do its parking as it relates to business, except that as long as businesses uh, convened like stakeholders, just like residents are. I think that's fine. But the city of Detroit's got to figure that out. Like, I'm not a parking expert or
Yeah.
planning expert to say that. And it does. I mean, there are things that just come with being in a big city, and that's not new. You know.
Yeah, it's kinda funny how people have all these parking opinions, but, Charity, I could definitely keep you here all afternoon, but, I feel like we've covered a lot in this conversation. I really appreciate your time and insight on these issues, so thank you so much for joining us. I'd love to have you back on another time.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Alright, great.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you so
Well,
much.
fun, Malachi.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Take care.
Okay.
Detroit Next is a community-led project from Bridge Detroit and Detroit is Different, which means that we can't do this work without you. We need your support. If you have a question or a comment and want to participate in this process throughout the year, give us a call. We have a phone line set up at 313-284-6407. Leave us a message and we'll play it on the podcast. If you like what we're doing, head to bridgedetroit.com and subscribe to our newsletters. All of that content, again, is free, no paywalls for anybody. We're trying to make this as accessible as possible. Head to our YouTube channel to get full episodes and interviews along with extra content throughout the year. You can also find the audio version of this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and detroitnext.podbean.com. We're going to be doing this all year long, so stay with us. Follow Bridge Detroit and Detroit is Different on your favorite social media platforms and take this ride with us. Thanks.